The power of the culture industry's ideology is such that conformity has replaced consciousness. People have so manipulated the concept of freedom that it finally boils down to the right of the stronger and richer to take from the weaker and poorer whatever they still have. Auschwitz begins wherever someone looks at a slaughterhouse and thinks they're only animals. Love is the power to see similarity in the dissimilar. The task of art today is to bring chaos into order. Intolerance of ambiguity is the mark of an authoritarian personality. As naturally as the ruled always took the morality imposed upon them more seriously than did the rulers themselves, the deceived masses are today captivated by the myth of success even more than the successful are. Immovably, they insist on the very ideology which enslaves them. The misplaced love of the common people for the wrong which is done to them is a greater force than the cunning of the authorities. People know what they want because they know what other people want. The triumph of advertising in the culture industry is that consumers feel compelled to buy and use its products even though they see through them. Freedom would be not to choose between black and white, but to abjure such prescribed choices. In the innermost recesses of humanism, as its very soul, there rages a frantic prisoner who, as a fascist, turns the world into a prison. To say we and mean I is one of the most recondite insults. He who integrates is lost. The creed of evil has been, since the beginnings of highly industrialized society, not only a precursor of barbarism but a mask of good. The worth of the latter was transferred to the evil that drew to itself all the hatred and resentment of an order which drummed good into its adherents so that it could with impunity be evil. There is no true life within a false life. On their way toward modern science, human beings have discarded meaning. The concept is replaced by the formula, the cause by rules and probability. Today's self-consciousness no longer means anything but reflection on the ego as embarrassment, as realization of impotence, knowing that one is nothing. Wrong life cannot be lived rightly. Humanity had to inflict terrible injuries on itself before the self, the identical, purpose-directed, masculine character of human beings was created, and something of this process is repeated in every childhood. A German is someone who cannot tell a lie without believing it himself. In Anglo-Saxon countries, the prostitutes look as if they pervade, along with sin, the attendant pains of hell. The forms of art reflect the history of man more truthfully than do documents themselves. The splinter in your eye is the best magnifying glass available. The man for whom time stretches out painfully is one waiting in vain, disappointed at not finding tomorrow already continuing yesterday. The aim of jazz is the mechanical reproduction of a regressive moment, a castration symbolism. Give up your masculinity, let yourself be castrated, the eunuch-like sound of the jazz band both mocks and proclaims, and you will be rewarded, accepted into a fraternity which shares the mystery of impotence with you, a mystery revealed at the moment of the initiation rite. The need to let suffering speak is a condition of all truth. For suffering is objectivity that weighs upon the subject. There is not much need for prophets who are in sync with their society. Advice to intellectuals: let no one represent you. For a man who no longer has a homeland, writing becomes a place to live. Knowledge, which is power, knows no limits either in its enslavement of creation or in its deference to worldly masters. Every work of art is an uncommitted crime. In the abstract conception of universal wrong, all concrete responsibility vanishes. The hardest hit, as everywhere, are those who have no choice. Talent is perhaps nothing other than successfully sublimated rage. The basest person is capable of perceiving the weaknesses of the greatest, the most stupid, the errors in the thought of the most intelligent. Once the last trace of emotion has been eradicated, nothing remains of thought but absolute tautology. The phrase, "the world wants to be deceived," has become truer than had ever been intended. People are not only, as the saying goes, falling for the swindle, if it guarantees them even the most fleeting gratification, they desire a deception which is nonetheless transparent to them. They force their eyes shut and voice approval, in a kind of self-loathing, for what is meted out to them, knowing fully the purpose for which it is manufactured. Without admitting it, they sensed that their lives would be completely intolerable as soon as they no longer clung to satisfactions which are none at all. The invocation of science, of its ground rules, of the exclusive validity of the methods that science has now completely become, now constitutes a surveillance authority punishing free, uncoddled, undisciplined thought and tolerating nothing of mental activity other than what has been methodologically sanctioned. Science and scholarship, the medium of autonomy, has degenerated into an instrument of heteronomy. Life has become the ideology of its own absence. The Enlightenment has always aimed at liberating men from fear and establishing their sovereignty. Yet the fully enlightened earth radiates disaster triumphant. Dissonance is the truth about harmony. Art as a whole is a riddle. Another way of putting this is to say that art expresses something while at the same time hiding it. But he who dies in despair has lived his whole life in vain. That all men are alike is exactly what society would like to hear. It considers actual or imagined differences as stigmas indicating that not enough has yet been done, that something has still been left outside its machinery, not quite determined by its totality. Technology is making gestures precise and brutal, and with them men. It would be advisable to think of progress in the crudest, most basic terms, that no one should go hungry anymore, that there should be no more torture, no more Auschwitz. Only then will the idea of progress be free from lies. Estrangement shows itself precisely in the elimination of distance between people. The poor are prevented from thinking by the discipline of others, the rich by their own. In the end, glorification of splendid underdogs is nothing other than glorification of the splendid system that makes them so. The bourgeois is tolerant. His love for people as they are stems from his hatred of what they might be. Everything about art has become problematic, its inner life, its relation to society, even its right to exist. The culture industry not so much adapts to the reactions of its customers as it counterfeits them. Vague expression permits the hearer to imagine whatever suits him and what he already thinks in any case. Writing poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. In psychoanalysis, nothing is true except the exaggerations. He who stands aloof runs the risk of believing himself better than others and misusing his critique of society as an ideology for his private interest. An emancipated society, on the other hand, would not be a unitary state, but the realization of universality in the reconciliation of differences. What can oppose the decline of the West is not a resurrected culture, but the utopia that is silently contained in the image of its decline. History does not merely touch on language, but takes place in it. True thoughts are those alone which do not understand themselves. It is one of the basic tenets of fascist leadership to keep primary libidinal energy on an unconscious level so as to divert its manifestations in a way suitable to political ends. Indeed, happiness is nothing other than being encompassed, an afterimage of the original shelter within the mother. But for this reason, no one who is happy can know that he is so. To see happiness, he would have to pass out of it, to be as if already born. He who says he is happy lies, and in invoking happiness, sins against it. He alone keeps faith who says, I was happy. It is not the office of art to spotlight alternatives, but to resist by its form alone the course of the world, which permanently puts a pistol to men's heads. Fascism is itself less ideological, in so far as it openly proclaims the principle of domination that is elsewhere concealed. In organized groups such as the army or the church, there is either no mention of love whatsoever between the members, or it is expressed only in a sublimated and indirect way, through the mediation of some religious imagine in the love of whom the members unite and whose all-embracing love they are supposed to imitate in their attitude towards each other. It is one of the basic tenets of fascist leadership to keep primary libidinal energy on an unconscious level so as to divert its manifestations in a way suitable to political ends. Cultural criticism finds itself faced with the final stage of the dialectic of culture and barbarism. To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. And this corrodes even the knowledge of why it has become impossible to write poetry today. Absolute reification, which presupposed intellectual progress as one of its elements, is now preparing to absorb the mind entirely. Critical intelligence cannot be equal to this challenge as long as it confines itself to self-satisfied contemplation. Very evil people cannot really be imagined dying. The individual mirrors in his individuation the preordained social laws of exploitation, however mediated. Intelligence is a moral category. The positive element of kitsch lies in the fact that it sets free for a moment the glimmering realization that you have wasted your life. In the end, indignation over kitsch is anger at his shameless reveling in the joy of imitation. Life has changed into a timeless succession of shocks, interspaced with empty, paralyzed intervals. Art is magic delivered from the lie of being truth. By abstaining from all definite content, whether as formal logic and theory of science or as the legend of being beyond all beings, philosophy declared its bankruptcy regarding concrete social goals. There is something embarrassing in the way in which, turning suffering into images, harsh and uncompromising though they are, wounds the shame we feel in the presence of the victims. For these victims are used to create something, works of art, that are thrown to the consumption of a world which destroyed them. People at the top are closing ranks so tightly that all possibility of subjective deviation is gone, and difference can be sought only in the more distinguished cut of an evening dress. Quality is decided by the depth at which the work incorporates the alternatives within itself, and so masters them. Love you will find only where you may show yourself weak without provoking strength. The specific is not exclusive, it lacks the aspiration to totality. Kitsch evokes a future utopia looking back at a past that is selectively remembered, thereby helping to stabilize the present toward which kitsch is otherwise deeply antagonistic. The human is indissolubly linked with imitation. A human being only becomes human at all by imitating other human beings. The first and only principle of sexual ethics, the accuser is always in the wrong. The lie has long since lost its honest function of misrepresenting reality. Nobody believes anybody, everyone is in the know. Lies are told only to convey to someone that one has no need either of him or his good opinion. To hate destructiveness, one must hate life as well. Only death is an image of undistorted life. Organic life is an illness peculiar to our unlovely planet. Tenderness between people is nothing other than awareness of the possibility of relations without purpose. The capacity for fear and for happiness are the same, the unrestricted openness to experience amounting to self-abandonment in which the vanquished rediscovers himself. The most powerful person is he who is able to do least himself and burden others most with the things for which he lends his name and pockets the credit. The joke of our time is the suicide of intention. There are no more ideologies in the authentic sense of false consciousness, only advertisements for the world through its duplication and the provocative lie which does not seek belief but commands silence. He who stands aloof runs the risk of believing himself better than others and misusing his critique of society as an ideology for his private interest. While he gropingly forms his own life in the frail image of a true existence, he should never forget its frailty, nor how little the image is a substitute for true life. Against such awareness, however, pulls the momentum of the bourgeois within him. Freud made the discovery quite genuinely, simply through working on his own material, that the more deeply one explores the phenomena of human individuation, the more unreservedly one grasps the individual as a self-contained and dynamic entity, the closer one draws to that in the individual which is really no longer individual. The good man is he who rules himself as he does his own property. His autonomous being is modeled on material power. The recent past always presents itself as if destroyed by catastrophes. What the philosophers once knew as life has become the sphere of private existence and now of mere consumption, dragged along as an appendage of the process of material production, without autonomy or substance of its own. A pencil and rubber are of more use to thought than a battalion of assistants. To happiness the same applies as to truth. One does not have it, but is in it. Everything that has ever been called folk art has always reflected domination. The power of works of art still continues to be secretly nourished by imitation. Kitsch words of the jargon sound as if they said something higher than what they mean. The film has succeeded in transforming subjects so indistinguishably into social functions that those wholly encompassed, no longer aware of any conflict, enjoy their own dehumanization as something human, as the joy of warmth. The total interconnectedness of the culture industry, omitting nothing, is one with total social delusion. Proletarian language is dictated by hunger. The poor chew words to fill their bellies. The thought that murders the wish that fathered it will be overtaken by the revenge of stupidity. Those who cannot help ought also not advise, and in order where every mousehole has been plugged, mere advice exactly equals condemnation. Philosophy must not bargain away anything of the emphatic concept of truth. Triviality is evil's triviality, that is, in the form of consciousness and mind that adapts itself to the world as it is, that obeys the principle of inertia. And this principle of inertia truly is what is radically evil. So the experience of death is turned into that of the exchange of functionaries, and anything in the natural relationship to death that is not wholly absorbed into the social one is turned over to hygiene. And being seen as no more than the exit of a living creature from the social combine, death has been domesticated. Dying merely confirms the absolute irrelevance of the natural organism in face of the social absolute. And so far as the culture industry arouses a feeling of well-being that the world is precisely in that order suggested by the culture industry, the substitute gratification which it prepares for human beings cheats them out of the same happiness which it deceitfully projects. Truth is inseparable from the illusory belief that from the figures of the unreal one day, in spite of all, real deliverance will come. When I made my theoretical model, I could not have guessed that people would try to realize it with Molotov cocktails. Bourgeois society is ruled by equivalence. It makes the dissimilar comparable by reducing it to abstract quantities. To the Enlightenment, that which does not reduce to numbers, and ultimately to the one, becomes illusion. Insane sects grow with the same rhythm as big organizations. It is the rhythm of total destruction. Everybody must have projects all the time. The maximum must be extracted from leisure. The whole of life must look like a job, and by this resemblance conceal what is not yet directly devoted to pecuniary gain. None of the abstract concepts comes closer to fulfilled utopia than that of eternal peace. Work while you work, play while you play. This is a basic rule of repressive self-discipline. Not only is the self entwined in society, it owes society its existence in the most literal sense. Rampant technology eliminates luxury, but not by declaring privilege a human right. Rather, it does so by both raising the general standard of living and cutting off the possibility of fulfillment. The usual reproach against the essay, that it is fragmentary and random, itself assumes the givenness of totality and suggests that man is in control of this totality. The desire of the essay, though, is not to filter the eternal out of the transitory. It wants, rather, to make the transitory eternal. The blessing that the market does not ask about birth is paid for in the exchange society by the fact that the possibilities conferred by birth are molded to fit the production of goods that can be bought on the market. Thought as such is an act of negation, of resistance to that which is forced upon it. This is what thought has inherited from its archetype, the relation between labor and material. Today, when ideologues tend more than ever to encourage thought to be positive, they cleverly note that positivity runs precisely counter to thought, and that it takes friendly persuasion by social authority to accustom thought to positivity. Culture is only true when implicitly critical, and the mind which forgets this revenges itself in the critics it breeds. Criticism is an indispensable element of culture. The straight line is regarded as the shortest distance between two people, as if they were points. Newness only becomes mere evil in its totalitarian format, where all the tension between individual and society that once gave rise to the category of the new is dissipated. Today the appeal to newness, of no matter what kind, provided only that it is archaic enough, has become universal, the omnipresent medium of false mimesis. The decomposition of the subject is consummated in his self-abandonment to an ever-changing sameness. In sharp contrast to traditional art, modern art does not hide the fact that it is something made and produced. On the contrary, it underscores the fact. If philosophy is still necessary, it is so only in the way it has been from time immemorial, as critique, as resistance to the expanding heteronomy, even if only as thought's powerless attempt to remain its own master and to convict of untruth, by their own criteria, both a fabricated mythology and a conniving, resigned acquiescence. A successful work of art is not one which resolves objective contradictions in a spurious harmony, but one which expresses the idea of harmony negatively by embodying the contradictions, pure and uncompromised, in its innermost structure. The new human type cannot be properly understood without awareness of what he is continuously exposed to from the world of things about him, even in his most secret innovations. The idea that after this war life will continue normally, or even that culture might be rebuilt as if the rebuilding of culture were not already its negation, is idiotic. It is incumbent upon philosophy to provide a refuge for freedom. Not that there is any hope that it could break the political tendencies that are throttling freedom throughout the world both from within and without, and whose violence permeates the very fabric of philosophical argumentation. The sublime is only a step removed from the ridiculous. The culture industry perpetually cheats its consumers of what it perpetually promises. The promissory note which, with its plots and staging, it draws on pleasure is endlessly prolonged. The promise, which is actually all the spectacle consists of, is illusory. All it actually confirms is that the real point will never be reached, that the diner must be satisfied with the menu. All testify to the coercion and sacrifice which culture imposes on man. To rely on them and deny the decline is to become even more firmly caught in its fatal coils. In the end, the writer is not even allowed to live in his writing. The empirical usability of the sacred ceremonial words makes both the speaker and listener believe in their corporeal presence. The work of art still has something in common with enchantment. It posits its own, self-enclosed area, which is withdrawn from the context of profane existence, and in which special laws apply. In myths, the warrant of grace was the acceptance of sacrifice. It is this acceptance that love, the reenactment of sacrifice, beseeches if it is not to feel under a curse. Kitsch parodies catharsis. It is in vain to try to draw the boundaries abstractly between aesthetic fiction and kitsch's emotional plunder. It is a poison admixed to all art. Excising it is today one of art's despairing efforts. The body's habituation to walking as normal stems from the good old days. It was the bourgeois form of locomotion, physical demythologization, free of the spell of hieratic pacing, ruthless wandering, breathless flight. Human dignity insisted on the right toque, a rhythm not extorted from the body by command or terror. The walk, the stroll, were private ways of passing time, the heritage of the feudal promenade in the 19th century. The law of the innermost form of the essay is heresy.